My name is Victoria White, and I'm 29. For the past 3 years, I've lived in a dream I thought would last forever: a luxurious apartment in the city, expensive dinners, weekend getaways, a life that felt like a perpetual vacation. And for nearly all of it, I paid for everything. Daniel, my boyfriend of 3 years, had been charming, attentive, the kind of man whose smile could make anyone believe in fairy tales. At first, we were partners in the truest sense. We split dinners, bills, chores, and chores that weren't really chores because we were happy to do them. But then came the layoff. He promised it was temporary. I believed him. I offered to cover rent and utilities while he searched for a new job. After all, supporting each other in times of need was what partners did, right? 2 years passed. 2 years of watching my hard-earned money disappear into bills, spa treatments, organic groceries, therapy sessions, gym memberships, and every indulgence Daniel decided he needed for his wellness. I worked 12-hour days, juggling client emergencies, presentations, and never-ending meetings, all while he posted Instagram stories about manifesting abundance and grateful for this blessed life. I barely recognized him anymore. The breaking point came last week. I had just returned from a 12-hour shift, my body aching, my mind buzzing with stress, when I walked into the apartment. There he was, on the couch, a jade face mask across his skin, scrolling through Netflix with that infuriatingly calm air of entitlement. I tried to breathe, tried to remind myself that love wasn't supposed to feel like this constant tension. "Hey," I said, dropping my bag on the floor. "The credit card got declined at the grocery store. I had to use my debit card." He paused, lifted a brow, and gave me a look I now recognize as pure condescension. "You know what, Victoria?" he said slowly, almost savoring the words. "You're the problem, always the problem. Your scarcity mindset is literally toxic." I stared at him, disbelief tightening my chest. "Scarcity mindset? Daniel, I'm asking about our budget. We've gone over again. See?" he interrupted, waving his hands. "Problem, problem, problem. Maybe if you weren't so obsessed with money, you'd actually be happy." I could feel my jaw clench. My chest was tight, my hands trembling. "I focus on money because I'm the one paying for this life, Daniel. The only one making any money right now. You." "I can't deal with your toxic masculinity right now," he snapped, standing up, face mask still on, hair disheveled, looking absurdly dramatic. He grabbed his Louis Vuitton bag, yes, the one I had bought for him last month, and left. I sat down on the edge of our oversized leather couch, staring at the apartment that wasn't his, the furniture that I had paid for, the art on the walls I had picked out. I realized, with a strange mix of anger and relief, that I was done. Done being blamed, done being taken for granted, done watching someone I loved become a stranger. The next morning, while Daniel was at his standing spa appointment, a ritual I had long since stopped paying for, I packed. Every item I owned, every piece of evidence that I had been the silent backbone of our life together, went into boxes. I called the landlord, gave 30 days notice, canceled subscriptions, removed him from all accounts, changed passwords on streaming services, stopped the automatic transfer to his checking account. I left a note on the kitchen counter. "You were right. I was the problem. Problem solved. The apartment is paid through the end of the month. After that, it's all yours. Good luck on your journey." I moved into a friend's spare room, $600 a month, utilities included. For the first time in 2 years, I could breathe. I could feel my chest unclench. My life no longer depended on someone else's entitlement. 3 hours later, my phone exploded with calls and texts. "Where are you? Why is Netflix not working? Did you seriously leave? We need to talk like adults. I'm calling the police." I didn't answer. I sent one text. "You said I was the problem. I removed the problem. Good luck." Then I muted his number. Not blocked. I wanted evidence if things escalated, but muted. According to our mutual friend Janine, who stayed neutral but kept me updated, Daniel spent the first 2 days convinced I was bluffing. He told everyone we were taking space to grow individually and that I was away on a business trip. Reality, however, was sinking in fast. When the spa called to confirm his next appointment and mentioned the card was declined, the denial cracked. The entitlement escalated. And here's where it gets interesting. Daniel's first move was sheer denial. He genuinely believed I would cave, that I'd return with my hands full of apologies and resume paying for his life. Then came anger, manifested in 73 texts in 2 hours. Highlights included accusations of financial abuse, threats of lawsuits, and declarations of emotional devastation. He claimed we were basically married despite never signing a contract, insisting that he had been abandoned. Next, bargaining. He tried to negotiate with me from a position of weakness, offering to reduce spa visits, to consider a part-time job eventually, and even suggesting chore charts. Not once did he offer to pay rent or bills immediately. Then manipulation. Daniel went so far as to claim he was facing a mysterious illness requiring costly treatment. I calmly forwarded him the landlord's number and reminded him he wasn't listed on the lease. Finally, desperation. Remember the car I had been paying for him? Payment was due 5 days after I left. He texted me, pleading that I not ruin his credit. I had already stopped payments and begun the process of selling the car. His entitlement was staggering. He hadn't considered finding a job, asking for help, or taking responsibility. He only knew how to demand, manipulate, and exaggerate. Throughout all this, I documented everything, every call, every text, every attempt at manipulation. I realized something profound. Leaving wasn't just a matter of finances. It was a reclaiming of my dignity, my time, my peace. That night, I lay in my small but quiet room, listening to the hum of the city outside, and for the first time in years, I felt free. Free from blame, free from manipulation, free from the suffocating weight of entitlement disguised as love. I knew the storm that Daniel would unleash would be chaotic, absurd, and dramatic. But I also knew I was ready. I was ready to face the aftermath, and I was ready to watch a life built on manipulation begin to unravel. The first night alone in my friend's spare room, the quiet was almost deafening. No Louis Vuitton bags sprawled across the floor, no half-empty yoga mats or meditation candles cluttering every surface, no constant barrage of "you're the problem" echoing in my ears. For the first time in years, I could hear myself think. I had a strategy. A plan. Daniel chaos was inevitable, predictable even. I knew his pride would be bruised, his entitlement inflamed, but that didn't scare me anymore. The apartment was in my name. Every subscription, every automatic payment, every shared account, cut. No loopholes, no excuses. He wouldn't be able to pull me back into his games. 3 hours after I left, the first wave hit. My phone lit up with messages, a torrent of panic and disbelief. "Where are you? Why is Netflix not working? You can't just leave. Call me." I didn't respond. One text was enough. "You said I was the problem. I removed the problem. Good luck." Then silence. Muted notifications let me breathe. And as the city slept outside my tiny window, I allowed myself a small, victorious smile. The next morning, Janine, our mutual friend, who somehow remained neutral, sent me a text. "Daniel thinks you're bluffing. He's telling people you're on a business trip." I laughed softly. Bluffing? No, this was real life, real consequences, and he was about to learn that. By day 2, reality hit Daniel like a tidal wave. The spa called to confirm his weekly appointment, and the card he thought I had magically funded declined. Denial crumbled. Anger set in. The messages began again, faster, more desperate. 70 texts in 2 hours, filled with accusations, threats, and self-pity, masquerading as outrage. I leaned back in the chair, sipping my coffee, and read the messages like I was watching a poorly written drama unfold. "Financial abuse. Emotional abandonment. I'll sue you for leaving me," he typed. I shook my head. "You've been living off me for 2 years. That's not abuse. It's reality." Then came bargaining. He promised to cut back on spa visits. He offered to consider a part-time job. He suggested chore charts. I let it slide into my mental folder marked amateur hour. Not once did he propose paying rent, groceries, or bills immediately. He was desperate to appear cooperative, but his actions never matched his words. Manipulation followed soon after. First, the dramatic health scare. Daniel claimed he had a mysterious illness requiring expensive treatment. I forwarded him the landlord's number and reminded him he wasn't on the lease. Then, the emotional ploy, threatening suicide unless I intervened. I called 911 to ensure a wellness check. When the officers arrived, he was fine, frustrated, and embarrassed. My response? Document everything, maintain boundaries, protect myself. By day 4, desperation became obvious. Remember his car? Payment due 5 days after I left. He begged me not to ruin his credit. I had already stopped the payment and started selling the car. When he tried to start a GoFundMe, claiming he was destitute, he raised $45, almost entirely from his mother and aunt. Social media, as I expected, wasn't on his side. Comments were merciless. Wait, didn't you just post about your spa last week? And then, of course, the fake legal threats began. A Gmail account, posing as a law firm, appeared in my inbox, demanding tens of thousands for breach of implied cohabitation contract and emotional distress. I forwarded it to my lawyer friend. His response, completely fake. Want me to send a real cease and desist? Yes, I replied, tapping my pen against the table. Daniela's games would not touch me. Not anymore. I started to notice something else during all this. His predictable escalation. Each day followed a rhythm: denial, anger, bargaining, manipulation, and finally, desperation. It was almost mathematical, a tragicomic formula for entitlement. I watched, fascinated, as his reality collapsed around him. One morning, I received a text from a number I didn't recognize. Hello, is this Victoria? I'm calling on behalf of Daniel. He hired me to mediate your relationship transition. The voice was cheerful, clinical almost. Mediator? For what? I let it go to voicemail. The audacity was staggering. He had the gall to hire a life coach with my money, trying to force a resolution that would benefit him. I smiled quietly. You don't get to buy my compliance anymore. Meanwhile, I could finally breathe financially. No more paying for someone who refused to work. No more overdraft panic. No more constant calculations just to keep him comfortable. I had a small apartment lined up, a real lease, my name on it, and a small savings account returning to life. I could feel it growing again, the sense of control, independence, dignity. Daniel, of course, didn't see it that way. Every friend, every mutual contact became a messenger, telling me of his absurd antics. He tried selling the furniture, claiming ownership. He posted outrageous invoices for emotional labor during our relationship, $25 an hour, $30,000 per year in household management, $50,000 for intimacy coordination. I couldn't help but smirk at the sheer audacity. Janine reported the funniest moment yet. He claimed he had to take over the apartment by pretending I had died, hoping the landlord would let him assume the lease. When the landlord called, panicked, Daniel had to prove he wasn't dead. His dramatic rage? Immeasurable. And through it all, I remained calm. I didn't chase. I didn't yell. I documented everything, prepared every step, and protected myself from every attempt at manipulation. I realized, with a quiet thrill, that I had regained the power I had lost. Power not through anger, but through composure, intelligence, and decisiveness. By the end of the first week, Daniel had begun to unravel. His delusions of entitlement collided with reality. He had no income, no plan, and nowhere to turn. The apartment, the car, the life he had assumed would be handed to him on a silver platter, gone. I, on the other hand, slept that night in my small, perfectly quiet room, knowing that the chaos outside was no longer my responsibility. My reflection in the mirror was calm, my chest unburdened. I had left behind not just a toxic relationship, but years of silent compromise, exhaustion, and misplaced loyalty. And yet, I knew the storm wasn't over. Daniel's next moves would be louder, more desperate, and increasingly ridiculous. But for the first time, I felt ready to face the aftermath. Not as a victim, not as the one blamed, but as the woman who reclaimed her life and was about to watch a world built on entitlement begin to crumble. By the second week after I left, Daniel had fully entered what I privately called the delusion phase. His reality had fractured, and the drama that followed was equal parts tragic and absurd. Every mutual friend seemed to have a front row seat to the chaos, reporting each escalating act like news bulletins from a slow-motion train wreck. The first signs were predictable. He bargained like a man negotiating with life itself. I'll cut spa visits to once a month, he declared to anyone who would listen. I'll consider a part-time job, eventually. He even suggested chore charts. Yes, chore charts. To a man who hadn't touched a vacuum or a dishwasher in years, none of it mattered. The only thing he wanted was the illusion that he still controlled the narrative, that he could bend reality back to the way it had been. Me paying, him enjoying. Next came the manipulations. The emails, the texts, the voicemails piled up faster than I could read them. He claimed sudden, urgent medical crises. He faked injuries requiring expensive treatment. He even alleged that he was being harassed and abandoned, though by now everyone who mattered already knew he was the architect of his own disaster. I forwarded the messages to my lawyer friend and to Janine. Documentation, I reminded myself, was my greatest weapon. The most absurd chapter, though, was the fake legal phase. One morning, I opened my inbox to a message from an account posing as a law firm, Sterling Legal Associates no less. They demanded $50,000 for breach of implied cohabitation contract and emotional distress. I laughed. Then forwarded the email to my friend and lawyer. He called back, deadpan. Completely fake. Want me to send a real cease and desist? Yes, I replied, feeling a small thrill. I was no longer reacting. I was executing. Daniel's antics were predictable. They were a pattern, and I had the foresight to neutralize each one before it became dangerous. Meanwhile, Daniel's desperation began to manifest in public. He tried selling furniture, electronics, even small kitchen appliances from the apartment I had left. Facebook Marketplace posts went up, then vanished as soon as I flagged them as fraud. He attempted GoFundMe campaigns, claiming destitution, raising a meager $45 almost entirely from family. Each attempt at monetizing his misery only made him appear smaller, more pitiful. Social media became a stage for his delusion. Stories painted a life of hardship and victimhood, but every post was riddled with contradictions. Spa visits, Instagram meditations, designer purchases, all meticulously documented by mutual friends. Comments erupted. Wait, didn't you just post a new facial mask yesterday? Girl, maybe try Indeed instead of sob stories. I couldn't help but smile at the poetic justice. Then came the personal touches of absurdity. One day I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. Hello, is this Victoria? I'm calling on behalf of Daniel. He hired me to mediate your relationship transition. I listened to the voice of a professional life coach, composed, encouraging, completely unaware of the real situation. The irony wasn't lost on me. Daniel had hired someone with my money to try to manipulate me into compliance. I let the voicemail sit. I didn't return the call. My boundaries were no longer negotiable. By this time, I had begun to enjoy the view, not out of cruelty, but because the contrast between our worlds had never been clearer. I had reclaimed my space, my money, my dignity. I could sleep at night without fear of surprise accusations. I could breathe without anxiety about overdraft notices or credit card declines. I had a small, modest apartment lined up, a lease in my name, a savings account slowly refilling. And Daniel was imploding spectacularly. The apex of his entitlement arrived when he tried to claim ownership of the apartment itself. He called the landlord, pretending I had died, attempting to assume the lease as my common-law spouse. When the landlord called me in panic, I calmly confirmed I was alive. The shock, the rage, the frantic messages that followed, they were almost artful in their absurdity. Janine's updates made me laugh in private. He's screaming at the landlord. He's threatening to sue everyone. It's something else. I also discovered his invoice stunt. He tried to calculate how much he earned as my boyfriend. $25 per hour for emotional labor, $30,000 year for household management, $50,000 for intimacy coordination. The total? $186,000. I kept the screenshots. It would make a good story someday. Despite the chaos, I remained calm. My life wasn't derailed by his antics. Every text, every post, every claim of victimhood was documented, categorized, and stored. I was no longer reacting emotionally. I was observing, analyzing, and preparing for the inevitable final collapse. And yet, there was a thrill in watching it all unfold, a quiet satisfaction in seeing someone so certain of their entitlement forced to confront reality. He couldn't manipulate me anymore. He couldn't guilt me. And the more outrageous his actions, the more my independence felt cemented. Even when he resorted to desperate stunts, posting on social media about eviction, fake illness, emotional trauma, I was prepared. My phone dinged constantly, Janine reporting updates with dramatic flair. Every attempt he made to draw me back into his orbit failed, often spectacularly. By the end of this part of the saga, I realized a crucial truth. People like Daniel can be controlled only by consequences, not arguments. No amount of reasoning could have made him responsible or grateful. Only when reality hit him, when the apartment, the car, the social image he had assumed were gone, did he face the mirror of his entitlement. And I? I was beyond the mirror. I had reclaimed my life, my finances, and my peace of mind. The next stage of the story would be messy, public, and utterly entertaining, but I would face it with calm strategy, confidence, and the knowledge that my strength could no longer be questioned. I sipped my coffee, scrolling through messages from friends with updates on his latest stunt, and allowed myself a small, victorious smile. The storm was far from over, but I was ready. Daniel entitlement had reached absurd heights, and the fallout was only just beginning. By the third week after I left, Daniel life was no longer a story of entitlement. It had become a cautionary tale. Every stunt, every desperate maneuver, every fabricated crisis had begun to collapse under the weight of reality. And while he scrambled, flailed, and raged, I watched from the distance of my small but quiet apartment, documenting each move, savoring my reclaimed peace. It started with the lease ending. I had paid for the apartment for over 2 years, but the last 9 days would mark the definitive shift. Daniel had no income, no plan, and no leverage. On moving day, he attempted one final spectacle. He rented a U-Haul, whose money, I wondered, but managed to haul only a fraction of the apartment. He tried to remove items he didn't own, claiming they were his, or that I had agreed he could have them. He unscrewed outlet covers, snatched batteries, and left trash strewn across the apartment. I had prepared for this. 2 friends accompanied me for the walkthrough, witnesses to the chaos. The landlord was astounded but unsurprised. The apartment, though damaged in minor ways, had survived better than Daniel Ego. His mother was present, a final attempt at emotional leverage. "How could you do this to my baby?" she demanded, waving invoices and statements as if they could reverse reality. I remained calm. I recited the facts. He had no claim, no ownership, no right to demand anything. I had left a note, severed all financial ties, and documented every step. Facts were my armor. But the grand finale of absurdity came in the form of legal theatrics. A law firm email threatening him with tens of thousands for emotional distress had disappeared almost as quickly as it arrived. Through Janine's careful investigation, we traced it to Destiny, one of his friends, acting as a pseudo-lawyer in a misguided attempt to help him regain control. Amateur criminal masterminds, I thought, shaking my head. The car repossession followed shortly after. He had relied entirely on my payments. When those stopped, the inevitable arrived. Daniel filmed himself crying, posted videos, tagged me indirectly as the villain. Social media, once a playground for his fabricated victimhood, now became the judge and jury. Comments were merciless. "Your car? Who actually paid for it? Maybe get a real job instead of sob stories." Even the invoices he sent for emotional labor became public amusement. 3 years of living off someone else's labor suddenly quantified as $186,000 in imaginary wages, household management, and intimacy coordination. I saved screenshots for posterity, knowing the absurdity of his claims would one day be legendary. Through all this, I began to notice patterns in his behavior. Daniel had escalated predictably: denial, anger, bargaining, manipulation, desperation. Each phase had a theatrical flourish, each tactic designed to pull me back under his control. And yet, none of it worked. Not because I was cruel, but because I had boundaries and the resolve to enforce them. The day-to-day chaos was almost cinematic. He tried selling possessions online, posting fake stories of hardship, claiming eviction notices, medical crises, and emotional abuse. Each attempt backfired. One GoFundMe raised $45, almost entirely from family members. He lied about illness and injury. He created fake job references and stories. Every story contradicted the last. Reality was slowly eroding his credibility, and I watched from a safe distance, confident in my own stability. Social media exposure became the turning point. He was fired from the sports bar he had finally found a job at, after giving out his Venmo handle to customers with notes asking for tips. Then came the brief phase of delusion in the fitness influencer world, posting videos, pretending to coach others despite no qualifications. Each venture lasted only days, collapsing under the weight of incompetence and truth. Meanwhile, my life quietly blossomed. I signed the lease for my own modest one-bedroom apartment. Savings began to grow. Nights were peaceful. Weekends were mine. Bills were manageable, and for the first time in years, I could plan my life without fear of being sabotaged by someone I had loved. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. Through mutual friends, I learned about Daniel's latest delusions. He had met a new woman, let's call her Amanda, who had no idea of his history, and he tried to sell her the same story of hardship, victimhood, and entitlement. When confronted, the delusion became evident. He had no stability, no credibility, and no ability to maintain trust. Meanwhile, social media had begun its judgment. Posts about new beginnings and Phoenix rising only highlighted the contrast between his words and actions. Reality, like gravity, was unforgiving. Daniel had reached the point of complete social collapse, fired, friendless, financially destabilized, and publicly exposed as the architect of his own misery. And yet, through all of this, I remained untouched, calm, prepared. My life was moving forward, not backward. I realized that the ultimate victory wasn't in revenge or humiliation. It was in reclaiming myself, my finances, and my peace. The chaos he had created, the entitlement he had nurtured, and the manipulation he had perfected, none of it could touch me anymore. By the end of the week, the final domino fell. Social circles had distanced themselves from him. He was alone, unemployed, and publicly humiliated. My friend Janine, ever reliable, sent a final update. He was moving out of state, trying to start over where no one knew his past, where his entitlement wouldn't follow. I smiled quietly, sipping tea in my own apartment. The storm had passed. Daniel's collapse had been messy, chaotic, and dramatic. But I had been prepared for it. And now I could focus on myself, my career, my health, my friends, and the simple, profound joy of living without manipulation or blame. I leaned back, watching the sunset through my apartment window, and realized leaving had been the act that saved me. Not confrontation, not argument, not compromise, but the courage to remove myself from toxicity entirely. The lesson was clear, almost painfully so. Some people cannot be reasoned with, cannot be persuaded, and cannot be trusted to act responsibly. And when someone repeatedly tells you that you're the problem, the only real solution is often to walk away, to leave the problem behind. And that's exactly what I did. Weeks after Daniel collapsed, the quiet in my apartment felt like a deep exhale. No chaos, no ultimatums, no barrage of texts accusing me of being the problem. Just the soft hum of my refrigerator, the faint city noise outside, and the slow, steady rhythm of my own heartbeat. I unpacked the last box of my belongings, placing the small items, photographs, a few favorite books, a candle, on shelves I could finally call mine. Every object felt like a quiet victory, a reminder that I had survived years of manipulation and entitlement and emerged intact. I paused by the window, looking out at the skyline, and allowed myself to breathe fully, freely, without guilt or fear. Work had become my sanctuary. I threw myself into projects, deadlines, and creative problem-solving, rediscovering the joy of competence and independence. The stress of supporting someone else's lifestyle had vanished. I could focus on myself, and for the first time in years, the work I did felt meaningful beyond survival. Friends became an anchor. Janine checked in regularly, sharing updates on Daniel's misadventures with a mixture of amusement and sympathy. But I rarely responded to the gossip. The narrative had changed. I was no longer a character in his drama. I was the author of my own story. Then there was Amanda. A mutual acquaintance, she had been in the periphery during Daniel's spiral, and we shared quiet laughs over the absurdity of his behavior. Her presence reminded me that not all relationships were built on entitlement or manipulation. Some could be supportive, balanced, and respectful, a world I had almost forgotten existed. The hardest lesson, though, was learning how to forgive myself. For years, I had carried the weight of blame, believing I was responsible for everything that went wrong. But as I watched Daniel World collapse under his own choices, I realized the truth. His actions were never my responsibility. My problem had never existed outside of his delusion. And stepping away, protecting myself, reclaiming my life, that was strength, not cruelty. Social media, which once amplified his entitlement, now became a mirror of reality. I noticed his posts dwindling, his public persona unraveling. Where he had once projected victimhood and manipulation, there was now silence, punctuated only by desperate attempts at starting over. One post caught my attention. Fresh start, Phoenix rising, manifesting abundance. I laughed softly. The irony wasn't lost on me. In the quiet of my apartment, I began to rebuild not just my life, but my sense of self. Yoga mats unrolled, notebooks opened, plans laid out. I pursued hobbies I had abandoned, reconnected with family members I had neglected in the chaos, and allowed myself to dream again. The financial independence I had fought so hard to reclaim became a symbol of something deeper, my autonomy, my choices, my boundaries. Then came the small but profound joys, a weekend brunch with friends, laughter spilling across the table without guilt or stress. A new job opportunity that challenged me but didn't consume me. Even mundane moments, like grocery shopping or arranging flowers on my kitchen counter, felt like acts of self-determination. Daniel faded from my life almost entirely. Mutual friends distanced themselves from him, recognizing his patterns and my boundaries. I heard through the grapevine that he had moved to another state, attempting another fresh start where no one knew his past. And I realized something essential. His life, chaotic as it was, no longer intersected with mine. My happiness was no longer contingent on his actions, his moods, or his entitlement. One evening, as I curled up with a book and a cup of tea, I reflected on the journey. The anger, the frustration, the chaos. It had been intense, almost cinematic in its scale, but the ultimate narrative was mine. I had survived manipulation, entitlement, and gaslighting. I had reclaimed my life, my finances, and my peace of mind. And in doing so, I had discovered a power I had almost forgotten existed, the power to leave, to protect myself, and to thrive. I allowed myself a small, private smile. Life was messy. People were complicated. And sometimes the most courageous act was not confrontation, not argument, but walking away, untangling yourself from someone who cannot change and refusing to take responsibility for their delusions. And so, I began anew. My apartment, small but mine, became a sanctuary. My work became a source of pride rather than stress. My friendships deepened, grounded in respect and mutual care, and in the quiet moments, I could hear my own thoughts again, unbroken by chaos, unburdened by blame. Daniel would continue his life, stumble, rise, and fall as he saw fit, but I had reclaimed my narrative. I had learned that strength wasn't measured by endurance alone, but by the courage to act decisively when the pattern became clear. I had learned that some people will never change, and sometimes the best solution is simply to walk away. As night fell, I looked out over the city skyline, lights flickering like distant stars. My past with Daniel was behind me. My future was mine to shape, filled with possibility, calm, and dignity. And for the first time in years, I truly felt free. The lesson, etched deep into my consciousness, was simple but profound. When someone repeatedly tells you that you're the problem, sometimes the most radical, empowering, and courageous act is to remove yourself entirely. And that's exactly what I had done.